I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. And what's amazing about this, and we have this cute picture here on the screen of course, the shepherd with this, typical staff. And if you haven't seen it, I love coming to the preschool plays. Here we have a preschool here in our church, and at Christmas time we have somebody dressed up as a shepherd, and we all go, "Oh, isn't that cute?" But that's not what I'm telling you. These guys weren't just like, you wouldn't see one and be like, "Oh, that's cute." They're probably very unkempt, dirty, tough, manly, raw hands. And this staff was not like, a whimsy little staff. It was a hard thing that, if you knock somebody over the head with it, you could really hurt them or kill them. So the staff wasn't just, see how it has that hook where they could hook a lamb or they could hook a sheep? They could also use it to kill someone, to defend their sheep. So when you read this again, you don't read it this version, by the way, when you put your kids to bed tonight, because it might give them nightmares. But when you read it this way, they comfort him because they're protection. This staff is protection. It can take away the enemies. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. And when we read Psalm 23, we just can't help it, right? We just get this good sense all over us, like, yes, that's what it's like to be under the good care of a good shepherd. The good shepherd provides all that we need, and when we're in his care, we have peace. And so you can see it's not that much of a stretch of the imagination that when Christ talks about being a shepherd in John 10, that people get it. And we should get it too, because we're actually already fairly familiar with this concept. In John 10, though, if you look with me, he talks a little bit further about one part we haven't seen, and that's the sheep pen. I tell you the truth, the man who does not enter the sheep pen by the gate, but climbs in some other way, is a thief and a robber. The man who enters by the gate is the shepherd of his sheep. And of course, I brought a picture for you. This is what a typical sheep pen would look like. And hopefully when Scott gets back from Israel, he'll have some cool pictures also. If you see there's some kind of like brown brush over that part there where there's some rocks, those are actually thorns that can cut you and hurt you. And the object was that if you were a thief and a robber and you tried to climb into the sheep pen, you would be scratched up, and hopefully by the time you were screaming in pain, the shepherd would get there in time to take care of you with his staff. Or possibly if you were a wild animal and you tried to jump over, it would hurt you, and again you would be crying out, the animal would cry out in pain. So there's actually a very practical reason to have that there. As you can see, it's kind of circular. So the sheep were kept in the pen, and in the back there's a back room for the shepherd to be there. But the most notable thing about this is the front, where there's that little passageway, that little opening. That's the gate. That's the gate that Christ is talking about. So when Christ is standing there talking to people, and he says, they go through the gate, they're like, we know this. We do it every day. It's pretty common to them. What's remarkable about this gate is it's extremely narrow. I mean, probably your average American would not be able to go through it, okay? Because, our obesity and all that stuff. I mean, it just would not be good. Sorry about that. I mean, it's a very narrow passage. I mean, we probably go like this, maybe through it halfway. And it's such a tight way that there's only room for one person. And that person is the shepherd. And so again, there's a very practical, tactical sense here. Here are the sheep behind me. I'm standing in the way. You want to get to them, you got to go through me. And that was the objective of having that sheep gate so narrow. If you look at John 10, he says that the one that goes through there, the only one that can go through there is the shepherd. Not the thief, not the robber, not the wild animals. So it's very practical. And a little bit later on, he goes even further by saying and explaining to them that he is the gate, that he is the one that they have to go through. In fact, there's even more astounding things. I mean, I'm not hitting you a lot of facts here about shepherding, but I think it's important. In verse 3, it says, the watchman opens the gate for him, and the sheep listen to his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought out all his own, he goes on ahead of them, and the sheep follow him because they know his voice. And what that passage, those two verses are saying is that the sheep that are in the pen would hear the shepherd's voice, and that's when they knew it was time to go out. Okay, it's very different from American cattleship. Okay, I don't know if that's an actual word. I just made it up. I mean, it's very different from the way that our American sense of it. We typically see the cowboy, and he's behind okay, the herd, and he's, whipping them along, or they would make different sounds, very, very different from Middle Eastern, Palestinian area, okay? In fact, there's a story from the late 1950s, early 60s, where there was actually trouble in Palestine. That never happens, right? And there was trouble there, and they decided to take all the sheep away from a lot of the people, and they had a big holding area where they had hundreds of sheep. This one lady, the story goes, came to the soldier and said, "These sheep are the only way that I make my living. Please, I must have them back." And he says, "You're crazy. There are hundreds of sheep here. How will you ever find your sheep? Even if I wanted to give them back to you, how are you going to find them?" And she says, kind of like, "Let me worry about that. I'll get them." And finally, he jokingly says, "You know what? If you can get them out, if they can come to you, you can have them." And so the lady calls her son. And her son, who's obviously probably one of the main shepherds, kind of like we're thinking of David, brings along a flute. And he starts to play a little song. And of course, the sheep, they kind of have their head down, and you can kind of imagine all going, bah, that kind of thing. And all of a sudden, they're popping their heads up. They're popping their heads up. And because they hear the flute. And then the boy makes his way out of the sheep pen area, and they follow him. And they follow him all the way home. And then she says, "Take that." No, she didn't say that. I read that story, and I was amazed. I was like, wow, he actually plays his flute sound, and the sheep follow him. They follow him all the way home because they know the sound that they're trained to hear. They know the sound of the shepherd. They know that that's the sound that he would play, because typically we don't think about it in this sense. We're more relational with dogs and cats, but they would play flutes, and it's almost like their pet. They would calm them, so they would be used to the sound of this flute. And so when you read in verse 3 and 4 that the sheep hear the shepherd, they hear his voice, this is no joke. They really know specifically who is calling them and who's going out to them. And so you can kind of start to grasp the relation of what Christ is saying here. He's saying, when I call my sheep, when I call them by name, they know me. They pop up. They get excited, and they go and they follow me. Of course, we have the advantage of history, so we can kind of start to grasp this and get it together. But in verse 6, they say, Jesus used this figure of speech, but they did not understand what he was telling them. They didn't get it. I mean, they got the fact that he's talking about being a shepherd and being a sheep pen. They're like, okay, we get it. We do this every day. But they didn't understand why it was so important. So he goes on further in verses 7 and on, and starts to explain. He says, look, guys, okay, let me kind of dumb it down for you, okay? I am the gate. Remember that sheep pen gate? I am the gate. Anybody who wants to get to the sheep must go through me. And then he says, I am the good shepherd. I'm the one who takes it. He starts to break it down for them and explain it, because they need to understand that what he's basically saying is, I am the only way. Okay? I am the one who will take care of the sheep, so that they can make that connection. There's actually a second connection to the word shepherd, which we're not as used to. Okay, most of us probably wouldn't know as well. The word shepherd was actually also typically used when you wanted to talk about a leader. And typically in Middle Eastern nations, when you had a king, if the king wanted his people to know that he was like a king of the people, he would say, I am the good shepherd of this nation. You are my flock, and I take care of you. And the people would go, oh, that's great. That's awesome. He's like a good shepherd, okay? And so they had an understanding that the word shepherd not only meant literally taking care of sheep, but it also meant leadership. It meant someone who would take care of his people. There's an example in the Old Testament of this in Isaiah 40, verses 10 and 11. Here's what it says.